Hello and welcome back to the Homestuck Lore series. As always, I am Albion. In today's little video, we'll be talking about one of the main tools of players in SPURB, and honestly it's something that we didn't even mention in our first video, Sylladices. In order for players to make it through their session, they need to be carrying quite a lot of extraordinary stuff with them. Now, ordinarily the average human can carry a limited amount of stuff comfortably, even when we're very determined. Modern soldiers and the self-reliant kind of backpackers are probably the best examples we have, but now take a look at the image that I've just put on screen. Exhibit 1, Mr. Egbert. All that random nonsense currently held in his proud little hands, on his person, and generally scattered around him will shortly all be carried with very minimal effort directly on his person. The gormlessly cheerful lad that he is, you see, has no need to worry about weight limits or logistics or the bag packing, because, you see, he has his Sylladex. One of the most inconveniently convenient inventions to be found in his world, or on any world in which SPURB is destined to be played on. That in itself is very interesting, because these things always seem to exist on worlds where they're required, because you need the Sylladex to complete the game most of the time, suggesting that perhaps any world where the technology exists is already part of the cycle. Although, given that we already know that this setting runs on pre-destiny, perhaps I shouldn't be surprised. When a Sylladex user wishes to carry something, he need only place it within a card, known as a capture log card. This renders the presented object into a lightweight and portable form roughly the size and weight of an A5 piece of cardboard. Thus contained, it may be placed in a pocket as normal, but this ingenious system does have another layer to it, as there are only a number of these cards even a sensible person could carry. But this is where we get into the Sylladex itself, which is where the convenience of the system promptly, for most users, takes a nosedive straight into utter pants-on-head mad levels of contrived and irrational dysfunction. In order to place or retrieve items from their Sylladex, the user must use a fetch modus. Not for a Sylladex user, the simple act of putting things in and out at will. Oh no. The majority of fetch modus require the user to perform arbitrary and often obscure actions to access their gear, of which there seem to be a large variety in the series. We have more information on some than others, so I'll just be going through the ones we know the most about at present. Since most major characters have displayed the use of one, however, in this first part of the video we will be going through the Syllodexes used by the human characters in the series, both alpha and beta, while the ones used by trolls and other characters will be covered in a separate video that we'll call Part 2. First things first, we have the stack modus. The stack modus places all your cards in a pile, only allowing you to access the topmost one and ejecting the bottom one if you manage to overfill. It's generally considered useless even in the universe, unfortunately. Fortunately though, the stack modus does have another mode, referred to as Q modus, you can toggle between by flipping the modus over and moving a toggle on the back. Unfortunately the Q modus isn't much better, as it only allows you to access the bottom item directly. However, if you combine a pair of them, the opposites will be active at the same time, allowing you to perform an action known as Q-stacks, wherein the top and bottommost cards can be drawn. This combination is more useful than using either one separately, but not actually by much. The array modus, meanwhile, is perhaps one of the most useful we've seen, in that it simply allows users to take cards they wish at any time. Quite why this system isn't the default personally baffles me, but the characters in the show cite it as too boring to use, so I guess it's just me. If the array modus is combined with the aforementioned Q-stack modus, the Q-stack array will arrange your cards into 4 separate Q-stacks of equal size, making the perfectly sensible fetch modus right back to a lovely inconvenient one again. The tree modus arranges all cards into a tree of roots, branches and leaves. The first item capture logged is the root card. Any more items that are picked up become branches attached to the existing card and, like the root itself, may have up to 2 branches of their own. Branches with no further branches of their own are called leaf cards. Your cards, when using the tree modus, will be sorted alphabetically. They join the left branch of an existing card if they come alphabetically before that card, or they are moved to the right branch otherwise. The only cards the user may access are the root or leaf cards. Intermediate branches can only be accessed by moving them to the root or leaf positions via the optional auto-balancing feature. Unfortunately, if one is taking a root card, all the other items that are attached to the root on the branch and leaf level will fall out of the Sylladex, making the reason for actually taking the root card rather questionable at best. The hashmap modus works through a key-to-value lookup structure, making the hashmap modus one of easily the most mind-boggling we are presented with early in the series. Each card in the deck is given an index from 0 to the number of cards in the deck minus 1, so for example 10 cards leaves an index range of 0 to 9. When an item is capture logged into a hashmap Sylladex, where it is placed in the card deck depends entirely on the current hash function. If an object already occupies a card with the produced produced index number, that item is ejected from the Sylladex to make room for the item you're now trying to put in. In order to retrieve an item from the stack, the user must perform an action related to the item with a keyword that will produce the same index as the card that holds the desired item. Items are apparently retrieved so long as a relevant command with an equivalent hash is uttered, regardless of the user's actual desire to have the item. Such an example from the series is when a rather inoffensive bird was impaled with extreme prejudice by a spontaneously ballistic katana replica simply through the declaration of the word stop by the user. This occurred because the word stop managed to include the same hash sequence as the words ninja sword, which the katana was being filed under at the time, in this case a hash code of 7. On the back of the fetch modus card are several options: a potentially dangerous button, which ejects every item from the Sylladex for some reason. The second option allows the user to change the hash function to calculate indexes, although changing the hash function will eject all items currently in it, so make sure you don't actually have anything in it before you start fiddling, otherwise stuff is going to fly everywhere. The final option is a checkbox labelled Detect Collisions, which was originally unchecked on beginning of use. If checked, the user is actually prevented from capture logging any item that will cause another item to be displaced and ejected in the method mentioned above, making everything safer and also making me wonder why that toggle isn't on by default. Next, we have the collection of 12 fetch modi referred to collectively in the fandom as the Hasbro collection. A set of fetch modi that are modelled off of 12 games, namely Memory Cards, Jenga, Pictionary, Boggle, Monopoly, Yahtzee, Clue, Connect 4, Battleships, Ouija, Guess Who, and Operation. While highly fun, I must confess to finding the idea of how some of these would actually be implemented, especially since in the story proper, the user Jade Harley only ever uses 3 of them at the times that we're observing her. The memory modus uses an even number of capture cards. When an object is capture log, it is stored on 2 random cards. In order to access the item, the 2 cards in which the item is stored must be selected, and it appears that the item's positions are randomized when the item is initially capture logged. For most people, this would be troublesome to say the least, as trying to find where any given item is would take a lot of work. But since the person using it in the show happens to be precognizant, this turns the use of it from challenging into downright trivial. Next one we see her use is the Jenga modus. Each item, when capture log, is assigned to 3 random blocks in a Jenga tower. To retrieve the item, the 3 blocks must be removed. When an attempt is made to retrieve the specific item, it will helpfully highlight which ones you need to take, unlike the memory game. If the tower is toppled in the item retrieval process, all items in the tower will be ejected violently as it all collapses. This system does seem to be incredibly unwieldy and the most impractical of the Hasbro set that we've seen on screen. Last up we have Pictionary, which functions in a very straightforward method. You draw the stored item on a tablet and you retrieve it from your inventory if the drawing is close enough. How hard this is corresponds to how good of an artist you are. Miss Harley does manage to use it with mixed results, but is overall quite productive, although the drawing of complex items does seem to give her some trouble. Now we come to my personal favourite, the wallet modus. While using a basic system similar to the array that we mentioned before, it stores your capture cards in a wallet, which you can simply take out of the wallet anytime you want. This is utterly devoid of shenanigans, thus making the modus function similar to an everyday storage appliance such as a wallet or backpack, and is wonderfully uncomplicated as a result. In addition, this modus has something that does set it apart from the array, in that it is actually tangible outside of an ethereal dream realm concept that all the other modus seem to occupy. This means that the entire Sylladex can be passed around simply by passing the physical wallet from person to person without needing to empty it at all for anyone else to use the modus. This does seem to be due to the fact that the modus is bound to a physical object, which suggests you could potentially do this with other modus, but we've only ever seen it with the wallet. In addition to the standard eject all button, the wallet features a button for polishing, seemingly the only thing there that's rather out of place. In addition, the modus is one of the most powerful that we see in this series, being able to store in its cards significantly larger objects than the standard capacities of a capture log. Quite how extreme? Well, the stack Sylladex, the first one we see in the series, is unable to log a life-size Harlequin doll, marking it as too large. The wallet, meanwhile, at its peak in the series, literally manages to store an entire planet like it's no big deal. The recipes modus, at first, seems to function similar to an array modus, but this is one capture log that interacts very interestingly with Spurb, as it can be used directly with the in-game alchemy-based crafting system. By flipping the card, instead of showing the standard code shown by other cards, it shows you the recipe list of what items could be combined together to make the item you're currently holding. Now, outside of the game, you cannot say, combine a hammer and a pogo ride to make a pogo hammer simply by mashing them together. life doesn't work that way. But in Spurb you absolutely can, and exactly how we'll go into in our crafting video, because the whole alchemy system needs a lot of explaining. It's worth noting that the different recipes on the back of the card have vastly different grist cost values. This could mean a number of things. Either the different combinations resulting from exactly the same item will have different costs, or the recipes are for actually different variations arising from that item instead of being for the exact object you happen to have capture logged at the moment. Now we come to another relatively simple one, the puzzle fetch modus. The puzzle modus can store items of any size, turning them into cards of various sizes which the user must then arrange in order on a grid in order for them to all fit properly. If they do not fit the grid, the items that are causing the collisions will be the ones that are ejected. This modus is quite intuitive and a mirror of common inventory systems found in video games, using the space to dictate carrying capacity rather than a system of assigned weights. This system was made famous in video games such as the Resident Evil and Deus Ex franchise. Not much else for me to say on this one really. Like the wallet, it's simple, lacks too much nonsense, and is reasonably functional and usable by a sane human being without telepathic abilities. The fetch modus, known as message in a bottle, stands out quite a bit from the others. For one, it doesn't have you directly interacting with your cards. The module shrinks its grey cards, storing them in grey bottles, and then stores that bottle on a grey wine rack and liquor cabinet. At least we know what the designer's favourite colour quite clearly was. In order to retrieve your objects, you simply select the bottle you want off of the shelf and smash it on something. Rather direct. Though this does at least have the benefit of being a rather cathartic retrieval system if nothing else, but could sometimes be a pain if there are nothing easily smashable into around you that you could make use of. And for our final fetch modus for part 1, we have the tech hop fetch modus. This is a rather unique musical themed modus which organizes its items by placing them into grey shade columns and orange groove columns. All of the items in the shade column must have names that rhyme in some way, and all of the items in the groove column must have a thematic similarity in their naming, thus making the naming of items that you choose to put in this rather complex and making the whole thing rather a pain to navigate. This is perhaps one of the most convoluted in terms of just how much work you need to put into for a relatively simple system. It wouldn't be the one I'd choose. And with that, we conclude part 1 of our Sylladex video. I'll be seeing you all in part 2 for when we cover those used by trolls, non-humans, and the other miscellaneous cast members of the series. I do hope to see you there. For now, I have been Albion. Like and subscribe if you want more. Oh, and just as a little game, do let me know in the comments section which of the Syllidexes out of this video you choose. Bye for now.